Welcome to Uploading, the podcast where we take you behind the wheel with the world's best creators, marketers, and professionals who have cracked the code on how to profit through content. You'll learn the ins and outs of content strategy, creation, production, distribution, growth, platforms, tools, and more. If you haven't already, be sure to join Castmagic, the all-in-one content workspace for professionals. We'll be sending out tips from our shows in our weekly newsletter, and we've also got a Slack community of over 1,000 creators, so make sure to drop in and say hello. And now, get ready for the show. Welcome to Uploading. Today, we've got on Logan Lyles, who runs content and evangelism at teamwork.com. So, Logan, I'm going to let you kick us off. Why don't you tell us all about your background in the content, B2B marketing sort of space? I know you've done a lot. It's covered everything from podcasting to content to evangelism. So why don't you just tell us a little bit more about your background, how you got started, and then we'll get into the rest of the conversation.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Blaine. Thank you guys for having me on. And as I've said to my network on LinkedIn a ton, I've got this meandering path into B2B marketing. So I won't give the full story with all the stops along the way, but kind of the flyby to give people some context is I graduated college in 2008 and hit the market with a journalism degree right as the Great Recession was hitting, and horrible time to hit the job market, horrible time to have a journalism degree as that industry was going through a ton of disruption. And I promptly got into B2B tech sales. And I was always the salesperson for about the next 10 years who really loved marketing and saw what HubSpot was doing with inbound and these sorts of things. But I worked for smaller orgs that were kind of old school in their outbound sales approach without a lot of marketing support. And so I was kind of hungry for that. And so about 5 years ago, I got the opportunity to join a B2B podcast production agency through a relationship with my friend James Carberry. And I was like, ooh, this is an opportunity to combine kind of my journalism roots, my love of marketing that was kind of growing, and sales. So I came onto that podcast agency to take over sales from the founder, James, there. And so for the next 4 years, we grew incredibly well. It was kind of my first foray into podcasting. I became a host of top 10 B2B marketing podcast in B2B growth. And then about a year and a half ago, I moved over to teamwork.com and my first in-house role within a SaaS company. And today I host our every other week podcast, Agency Life. And one of the things we're probably going to unpack today is where does podcasting, LinkedIn, and something that I picked up in my time at Sweetfish, employee evangelism, where do all those things kind of intersect for really growth, whether you're an individual or you're part of a larger team.
Amazing. And yeah, I think that's a great place to start, right? Because there are so many overlaps between people who are individual content creators, people who are maybe small business solopreneurs who have a smaller sort of operation, all the way up to bigger teams. And I think, podcasting is like one of those mediums that really started as like an individual solo sort of person, solo creator sort of things. And I think we've started to see a big, adoption of it in the, like you're saying, in the B2B space, in the more corporate setting where everyone's like, wait a minute, we need to have a podcast too that sits within our greater content strategy. So why don't we just first start with what you were saying about, like, what do you need to know as an individual creator? Let's think about LinkedIn. Why don't you take us to some of your favorite strategies to grow as an individual creator?
Yeah. So this is something I'm super passionate about. I've been lucky enough to recently be invited to the Top Voices program with LinkedIn, kind of got that surprise in my notification feed and email, as I was mentioning to you guys before we hopped on. And, I'm no one huge. I don't have hundreds of thousands of followers on LinkedIn, but I've grown to about 19,000 followers. I got that invite to the Top Voices program. And for my time at Sweetfish, which, as I mentioned, was an agency, not a huge company, we really drove most of our pipeline and most of our new business through the content creation of individuals on the team, less so the company page on LinkedIn. It was funny, like new clients would come on, they're like, why don't you guys post anything to your LinkedIn company page? We're like, have you seen James's content, my content, Dan's content, other people on our leadership team? And they're like, yeah. We're like, that's why. And so when I joined teamwork.com, I actually put together a little course in our LMS for our sales team. So, I think salespeople are people who could get active on LinkedIn and benefit from it, not just using Sales Navigator, not just prospecting and sending DMs. And so if you're a solo creator or a solopreneur, you kind of fit that same vibe because you are a salesperson too. You're having to sell your services or grow your audience. And I think where you want to start is start following the people that are influential in your space. So if you're in the sales space or manufacturing or healthcare, it doesn't really matter, right? Look at the people who are in that space, do some searching on LinkedIn. You could also use a tool like SparkToro that helps you identify top creators in a given niche and just start following them. See what content that they're posting, those sorts of things. I used to do a thing where in order to kind of take that hit list of top 10 people who are already big in an existing space on LinkedIn, I would save their profiles to a Chrome bookmark folder. Now you can use the bell icon. LinkedIn has the bell icon like YouTube does. And so you can say, give me a notification every time Justin Welsh posts. Give me a notification every time, whoever it is in your niche that is posting. And then you'll start to see what's being talked about, what are people leaning in for. And then the second part of the strategy is start commenting. So one of the things that is great on LinkedIn is that you can grow organically and get visibility just by commenting without actually creating content. And that's just not the case with TikTok or Instagram or Facebook, right? If you've ever been scrolling on LinkedIn, think about this. If you scroll LinkedIn after listening to this episode and it says like, oh, Logan commented on this post, and then it shows the post, and then it shows my comment, right? I'm getting visibility and I didn't even create a freaking post, right? And so if you start doing that, one, you'll get some visibility. You'll get people maybe even liking your comment, right? And then, so once you start commenting, I would recommend people start connecting, start sending those connection requests, especially if people are engaging with the comments that you're leaving on bigger creators' posts. And then you can get to creating. Then you can start saying, hey, I commented on this big creator's post. 2 people liked it. Okay, maybe I should upcycle that into actual content. So before you get into, oh gosh, I got to script a 30-minute short form video, I got to write a 400-word post or something like that, just start with commenting, connecting, and then upcycling those into creating your own content. So that's kind of the 3-step process I would recommend to anyone who's looking to get started on LinkedIn this year.
I love that. And I think what's so great about it is it's so simple, right? Anyone can do it. You don't need to be like a crazy creator. You don't need a crazy microphone or setup like all of us have right now recording this. But yeah, so now once we've done that, right? Clearly I've seen your page. You're great at, hosting podcasts, putting out a whole bunch of other content. Why don't you walk me through what your sort of workflow and content strategy looks like now that you've got your podcasts, and like what's the type of content you're creating once you get past the content, past the commenting and upcycling, and now you're like, I want to use either longer form content, or like just tell me a little bit behind your broader content strategy.
Yeah, so as much as we wanted to kind of lower the barrier to entry and like, oh, you don't have to start out on camera and stuff like that, I want to encourage everybody. I do think that video, especially short form video, I think anybody listening to this is not surprised by, that's hot right now. YouTube Shorts, obviously TikTok, and even on LinkedIn, we're seeing, the same sort of trends there. And so I would recommend to people, make a few investments there and get comfortable getting on video. Even if you don't have, I've got a external camera with interchangeable lenses and a microphone that looks like Joe Rogan's microphone, but it's actually half the cost. I've got the little brother to it. But with a $100 Logitech webcam and I think it's $59 Audio-Technica microphone, you can actually level up your video without investing $10,000 into a studio or something like that. Like Chris Walker, one of the biggest names in B2B marketing, I remember seeing his daily video content before, as he was kind of rising up, and that was his setup. He had a decent microphone that didn't cost $500, and he had a webcam that was nice. And then just think about your lighting, like don't have a window behind you or something like that. So I would recommend to people that video is actually more approachable than you might think. And to make it even more approachable, if you are one who's like, I love talking to people, I'm not a great writer, maybe I'm not great on video, you can start interviewing people. So part of my role at teamwork.com is I host an every other week podcast called Agency Life. And that becomes a big source of my own personal content, as well as we'll get into later, how does that work into our distribution strategy on LinkedIn? of what we call an employee evangelism program, where we're activating individuals within the team to share that content. So I use tools like Castmagic, Descript, and some other video tools that make it very easy to actually create short form video content. And you don't have to do it alone, right? Even if you don't have a podcast, if you are a solopreneur or you're an individual in a larger team, you could use a tool like Riverside that we're recording on right now and just say, hey, let's hop on and riff a little bit, right? And then take those into a tool like Descript or Opus Clips or something like that and create some video content that's optimized for social without knowing Adobe Premiere or Final Cut Pro or DaVinci Resolve or anything like that. So those are some of the tactics and tools that I'd recommend there. Obviously, Castmagic is great for taking interview-based content and turning that into a tweet thread and other content like that. And so I would recommend just start conversationally, because if you're a solopreneur or you're a salesperson or you're within a larger org, you might not see yourself as a content creator, but just hopping on Zoom and chatting about, hey, this client said this, or I saw this post and I think that's, ridiculous. Here's how I think about it. Start with conversation, start with interviews, and then let that be kind of the pillar that you can turn into written and video content. Maybe it's my time at a podcast production agency, but I think that interviews are like the secret sauce to content repurposing and being able to create content for multiple channels, LinkedIn and otherwise. It lowers the barrier to entry, and there's so much you can do with it if you start with interviews and start with video and then break it down from there.
Yeah, and I definitely think even before even having to record an interview one-on-one and schedule it, you could even leverage internal meetings, recordings of meetings and conversations that you have. That's why I love the Castmagic iOS app. I now use it to record in-person meetings and just general conversations, because it's been far too often, too many times where I'm having a conversation. I'm like, man, I wish I would have captured that. Every conversation, most of our conversations are about what we do, especially during the weekday. And so the best ideas are distilled from there. And your brain, it's not going to go back and capture what was the best moments, etc. So you can just start by recording internal conversations. Before we get into the business side, which I'm curious about how, you mentioned the LinkedIn course for your employees, and then employee advocacy and evangelism to grow a business. I would want to double click on your workflow specifically.
Yeah.
How much time do you dedicate to writing your post? How far ahead do you schedule it? How much of it is when you come up with it at that very moment and hit publish? What is your workflow for content creation?
Yeah, I think this is something that is hugely important and something that one of my friends, Justin Simon, talks about a ton, in that so many content creators and so many marketers think about the content creation and they don't bake in enough time for the post-production and the distribution. And so thinking about okay, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to spend an hour being a guest or hosting a podcast, what happens after that? Because so much content can just die on the shelf if we just hit end and maybe publish it once, right? And so a big part of what I do is if I'm doing an interview, there are tools to find those key moments, those sorts of things. I kind of use a combination of tools like Castmagic and my own just human generated, hey, I'm having a conversation. That was a good moment. I'm going to write that down, right? Oftentimes what I'll do is I'll bring my interviews from a podcast into Castmagic and into Descript. And those are kind of my two main starting points. In Descript, oftentimes, if I love the way that you guys have kind of the timestamps for the video clips, and then find that timestamp in Descript and say, okay, this is the section right here. Descript does a good job of here's my full interview. Copy that to a new composition. I've got it down now. It's Shift Command C, boom. All right, that's a clip, right? And then leveraging some AI even within that tool to say, shorten my word gaps, take out the filler words. And now in just a couple of minutes, I can apply a template where it's got my captions with our branded font on there, the progress bar with our brand logo. It's got the logo of the podcast up in the upper right. And then I drop on my outro. I might take a look at the captions and kind of correct those a little bit from the AI. But that's one of the quickest ways to do short form video. And it's kind of combining a 1-2 punch of two tools in my arsenal. So that's usually one of my first go-tos, because I want to make sure that I'm getting 1, 2, 3 short form video clips out of every interview that I do. And then we're doing more from there to then create kind of like a promo clip for the video that's a little bit less like standalone value and more promotion, like, oh wait, what did the guest say there? I want to check out the full
It's the
episode.
movie trailer.
Yeah, exactly. Like I got this from something I've seen on Diary of a CEO, one of the biggest growing podcasts right now out of the UK. And in their intro on YouTube, it'll be like, we talked with so-and-so, here's who it is. And then they're like going into saying something, clip right before, they say the thing. So we're doing that as well. But what I want to encourage people is, in this workflow, I'm thinking about, how does this podcast or interview that I've, recorded elsewhere, how does that turn into standalone content that adds value? And how do I turn it into stuff that's going to promo the pillar piece of content if it's a podcast episode? Don't just do one or the other, do both. Have that 0-click content that like ends with the logo of your podcast, but it's not like, hey, check out this podcast, you'll learn XYZ. Like, tell them XYZ, pick out that clip that tells them something and gives them value. And then also that promo clip, and maybe you put some ad spend behind the promo clip as well. So we're kind of taking another 1-2 punch of standalone value repurposed content and then promo content meant to grow the audience for the podcast.
Logan, my next question was going to be around what we were kind of talking about earlier in moving from your individual creator to a smaller sort of team, right? I think one of the things that you told us earlier on is LinkedIn is great because it's got an algorithm, so it's going to push comments, it's going to push all this other sort of stuff. But one of the things it really pushes is it pushes individuals, especially when they're like interacting with each other and bringing one more layer of engagement to the party. So why don't you tell us a little bit about, for creators who maybe have a smaller team, how they can kind of like work together strategically to, make their content go a little bit further?
Yeah, absolutely. So one, I think social media in general is better when it's a team sport, and especially LinkedIn, because I've heard people talk about LinkedIn like it's an always on, ongoing industry networking conference. And it really is very much that way. Like we talked about earlier, LinkedIn surfaces comments unlike any other platform I've seen to, non-connections and stuff like that. Also, I don't know exactly what's going on with the algorithm, but I swear I will be emailing with someone. I will have a meeting like this one, whether it's to record content or not. And then that person will show up in my LinkedIn feed, or they'll show up in my notifications because I showed up in their feed. So I don't know what Google and Microsoft have going on behind the scenes. I'm no expert there, but like I've seen that connection. I've seen when I'm in someone's DMs or I've commented on their posts, then they're commenting back on mine. So I know that LinkedIn is kind of rewarding the networking that I'm doing with kind of that organic virality of getting that content into other people's feeds. So leverage that. If you've got a small team, something you could do is just on a Slack channel, and maybe you name it LinkedIn, or employee evangelism. And every time one of you posts, just drop it there and go leave an early comment and a reaction on that post. And then what you can do to kind of exponentially, share some of the reach there is, don't spam tag people. I'm not a big fan of like paid engagement groups or just like mass tagging people. Plus the algorithm's going to punish you for some of those things as well. But say we're all three on a team, right? And Blaine, you're like, hey, I just dropped this new post on LinkedIn. You guys, go give it some love. I do that instead of just commenting like, fire post, man, this is awesome. What are you talking about? You're talking about, podcasting. And I'm like, I'm going to tag my friend Dan Sanchez, who was at Sweetfish with me. He knows a lot about podcasting. He's running multiple shows. Like, hey, this part of what Blaine just said, Dan, do you have any thoughts on that? Right. And that sort of intentional, but yet very organic and authentic commenting and networking, both with your small team and then with the network around you, can be very, very effective, as opposed to just post and ghost and then hope that the algorithm does its thing. YouTube doesn't have the same sort of advantages in commenting and networking in your small group as what LinkedIn does. So take advantage of it, approach it a little bit differently. Don't just think about perfecting the content and getting it out there. Think about how are you going to engage and share and do some of those things organically, even if it's just 2 or 3 people and you're not, activating a employee evangelism or advocacy program in a 500-person SaaS company.
So I want to jump in here in between real quick, because speaking of algorithm, going all in on LinkedIn is a decision that you have to make over prioritizing time over other platforms. And so another text-based platform is X. And so I'm curious, how do you think about X, and how do you compare, for those listening who might be debating whether to go all in on X, go all in on LinkedIn, why LinkedIn over going all in on X?
Yeah, frankly, I have not been on X in a while. I mainly check in there for the NFL memes account that I follow and check every week and see what's funny, right? Stuff like that. So I can't say that like, look, I went down this path on X and I went down this path on LinkedIn. Personally, I've seen, pretty good success on LinkedIn and have been active there for, let's see, what's it been now? 5-6 years, something like that. So I don't think I could weigh in and say, here's why you would do this or the other. I think one of the questions that you could ask yourself, which as a content creator or a marketer, you should always be thinking about is, where is my audience, right? If they're all on X and you do some of that research, maybe you look at SparkToro and you look at what are some of the accounts people are following, what podcasts are they listening to, what YouTube channels are they following? Where are those folks repurposing their content? Are they more active on LinkedIn and getting engagement? Are they more active on X and getting engagement? And you might want to, follow the crowd that you're trying to gather and see where they're at. So I would say it comes down to kind of that fundamental marketing question of, where is your audience at, and go there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so on the front of professionals and businesses, we're seeing a lot of companies investing a lot of time and effort, such as Gong, Teamwork, Polo, a bunch of other platforms as well, into growing their LinkedIn business page and creating employee advocacy. So I definitely want to talk about how 100 plus teams are doing this. But first, I don't want to forget about those companies that have 5 people on their team. How do you know, is there opportunity if my team is just 5 people? Should I not even waste my time? And if there is opportunity, how should I go about it if I just have a small team to get active and grow my business LinkedIn page?
I think there's huge opportunity, and you might be in an advantage if you're at a 1 to 5 person to 10 person company right now. You're running a small agency or something like that. One, you don't have the bureaucracy of, if we launch an employee advocacy program, how do we let people in and tell some people no, and all the different things, and HR and legal and all that stuff. Like, you got 5 people, you can work it all out, right? So that's number one. Number two, I think the advantage is, like you guys were talking about earlier, every one of you is working with clients, is doing things, is interacting with the audience that you serve on a regular basis. You don't have knowledge that's kind of locked away in the founder's head up here, or over here in the services org, or over here in customer success. Like, it's all right there because you're doing the work and you're involved with the people that you're serving in your business. And so that leads me to, if those two things are true, back to something you said a little bit earlier, is start with conversation. Even if you aren't, even if you don't have a podcast or a YouTube channel, you don't have to. You can take conversation and you can take interview-based format and use it as that pillar to then break it down to other content, even if the original recording, the full thing, never sees the light of day, right? Like, everybody's been talking about long-form video and long-form podcast and repurpose that. But what if you have a long-form conversation recording and you bring that into something like Castmagic, and then also into Descript, or kick it to a video editor if you want to go that route and go higher level? You can do that. So I would say, do you have a recurring meeting on your team where you're talking about what's going on with clients? What are their challenges? What are some of the ways that you're solving those things? Because that's really where your expertise is shining. And then that brings me to the final benefit here. If you're in a smaller org, especially a service-based business, something like that, like, you're doing work with clients on a regular basis. And so think about, the people really are the product, right? And so when you share that content of, like, I was just talking with this client and now they're doing this and we advise them on this, sharing that in a LinkedIn post is basically like product marketing on a small scale, right? Because the people are the ones delivering the service. That is the quote unquote product. So get that out there on LinkedIn. So rant over, but that's my long answer
No,
to a short question on that one.
that's exactly what people want to read about. Unique content comes out of your story and what happens to you on the day to day. You might not think that your conversations are all that interesting, but they are different from what every other person is experiencing. And when you are different, where you are authentic, show a little bit behind the curtains, that's when content tends to perform really well. So
Yes.
yeah, go ahead, Blaine.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think sometimes it's tough to create content when you turn the lights on and you're like, okay, now go create content, right?
Yeah,
So
dance, monkey, dance.
exactly. And a lot of times you're best at doing what you're doing when you're not even thinking about it. So one thing that Ramon and I always do is every time we have a huddle, I literally use the Castmagic iOS app and just record it on the side because I know I'm not like thinking about making content,
Yeah.
but there might be a gem in there. And Logan, I think that's just like one of the easiest ways for people who are like trying to get started with content, who might not feel comfortable with like, oh my God, I have to come up with my content ideas and I have to script it and I have to set up a podcast. Like literally just record yourself when you least expect it and you know your mouth is going to be moving and something good is likely going to come out of there.
I'll just add on to that because I love that you guys have actually built a tool to enable this. Before Castmagic was around, when I was at Sweetfish, we were using Gong or Chorus.ai, one of those call recording tools, and we were using it exactly for that. And obviously that didn't have any AI built into it, didn't have, the quality of recording the audio or the video. But that's why we were doing is we're having these conversations. Let's turn that into content. And then the other thing is, so that lowers that barrier, right? And then the barrier is, what if I just get crickets on this post? Like, what if nothing happens there, especially if you're like 2024 is like my year on LinkedIn and I'm just getting started. Well, guess what? Stop looking at social media platforms as just like one-to-many like audience broadcasting and look at it as a testing ground, right? And look at it as that ongoing industry conference we were talking about. Like when you go to a conference and you're networking and that sort of stuff, like not every conversation like leads to the most amazing thing ever, but you're feeling out the room. You're like, this conversation over here, kind of treat it that way. And so if you reduce the barrier to quote unquote creating content, and then you reduce the barrier to publishing the content, then you're able to gain some traction. And then you're like, this post flop. People really cared about this. Man, we should talk about that now because you've been talking about it and you have this kind of already preset idea that the audience is going to respond to it. Now take 30 minutes and kind of script a quick video and try that for the first time, right? And then show that vulnerability, like my first video post, tell me, how bad it is and get your early network, kind of your pre-audience to give you some feedback. And approaching social with that sort of humility actually is going to help you build an audience. It's not going to hinder you like most people think in their heads.
Yeah, and a workflow is never done, right? Like it's constantly iterating on the workflow. I think Castmagic, which, we built to solve our own workflow of our podcast. I've solved the audio workflow side of things, but now I'm starting to get into video, and that's why I have this trash lighting here that I'm trying to figure out. But I need to figure out that workflow, and then getting into writing workflow. But as we get more towards the end here, I definitely want to touch on corporation content creation, employee evangelism, because I think that you are in the forefront innovating with all of this. As you mentioned, you created a course for your team members on how to get better at LinkedIn, etc. And so, dynamics change a little bit when you're thinking of a team of 5 people to 100, 500, 1,000. I know companies like Cisco are trying to have their 80,000 plus employees make content, etc. And so, first things first, like, what have you learned the most about this process of what is the gap and the difference between trying to teach 500 people how to make content versus, slacking back and forth with just 5 people?
Yeah. So I think the challenge is one of the things where quote unquote employee advocacy programs typically go wrong. They say, hey, we have this content. Oftentimes it's too salesy, but we can't address everything in one podcast episode. So maybe the content's not great that you're asking your people to share, but we won't go kind of down that rabbit hole. But one of the things is like this bystander effect, right? I've heard this in psychology of like, sometimes something might be going down, like someone's getting robbed and there's all these people around, but no one does anything because everyone's looking around like, surely someone's going to stop and help, right? And they're kind of looking at everybody else. That can be one of the reasons that people don't share company content as you're trying to activate quote unquote advocates within a larger company. Two, they might not know what to say or how to share it or, what's involved. And so I think that taking a step back, instead of just saying, hey, will everybody post this and just begging them, take a step and make it an invitation only thing, and then sequentially expand that out from there. So kind of think about it in 3 groups. So just put an invite out there of like, hey, we're trying to distribute content specifically on LinkedIn because it's a big channel for us as a brand. Who would be interested in sharing or creating content? And give them both options, right? You don't have to become a content creator. Maybe you're just, willing to be a sharer. So that's kind of your first group. And then you say, hey, if you're not up for that, would you just be willing to be part of a Slack group where when other members of that first group actually post, like you'll go in and leave a like and hit repost? I'm actually changing my tune on repost a little bit. When I was at Sweetfish, I always recommended our clients, like, don't hit repost. It's not as big a deal on LinkedIn. No one's going to see that repost. While that's true, reposts get very few views. Like if I repost your original, Ramon, but it is going to help your post in the algorithm. And so if you're looking at that second group as like reposters who are just kind of helpers, then you're not asking too much of them and they've already opted into that. And then the third group is people that you're reporting back to. So after, say, a quarter, and you got people opted in to be creators or curators or sharers, and then I need to come up with an alliteration for this. I apologize, guys, but hopefully people are still getting it. So that's the first group. And then people who are like, hey, I'm willing to be an engager or a reposter, right? Track kind of the progress. And especially if you're activating individual profiles, there are a few tools that I'm looking at right now. So Shield Analytics, Authored Up, and Taplio are 3 good ones for LinkedIn. Take the reporting that comes out of that, or even just a Google Sheet if you start there, and then quarterly share with everybody, hey, here's what happened with our LinkedIn employee evangelism program over the last quarter. If you want to join this quarter, here's kind of what the benefits have been. Make sure you give them the benefits to the company and to them. It's one of the things in the course I built for our sales team is like, what's in it for you? Why would you do this? Before I even told them, update your profile, start commenting, all these sorts of things. So that's how I would think about it, is those 3 concentric circles, and then that regular quarterly rhythm of inviting people and reporting on what were the wins from the last quarter.
Logan, as we kind of wrap up here, I definitely wanted to hit you with the lightning round. So we're going to keep this one a little bit shorter and sweeter, but okay, we'll go ahead and go for it. So the first question I have for you is, who is a creator that's like a big name creator that you think is absolutely crushing it, you love their strategy and you love their content?
Yeah, so I think Alex Hermozi is just doing a phenomenal job here, and he's kind of become the new Gary V. In 2024 right now. He's kind of come up. He's talking about some similar things with business and entrepreneurship and kind of scrappy marketing, and he's kind of been unpacking some of his social media strategy. Obviously like Gary V has done, and there's a lot of similarities there. So if you're not following Alex Hermozi, you're an entrepreneur, you're a solopreneur, you're a business owner, or even if you're in marketing in a larger org, I think there's things you could learn from following his content across pretty much every channel he's crushing right now. He really kind of started on YouTube and now is doing LinkedIn really well and doing X really well, and all the things.
He's even doing Threads.
Yeah, I was going to say that, Ramon. I was going to say, like, every time I'm on Threads, I see him like going for it. So, all right, next question, similar but slightly different, is who is a creator that's like up and coming that maybe not everyone knows about, but that you think is doing something different and is going to be big?
So this one, I would say Jay Clouse, Clouse, especially if you are a creator listening to this. He's got a show called Creator Science, and he's kind of the meta creator, the creator for creators. And he's not only someone that I'm looking at who's a little bit further ahead, like how he's doing YouTube, and he's got a bit of a team, but he's not like Alex Hermozi or Gary Vee level. He's part of the HubSpot podcast network. And so he's a little bit further along in kind of the creator journey than myself, but he's continuing to grow. I think he just, brought his wife onto his staff as I've been following his content. So he's someone who I love following the content, and I love looking at someone who's a little bit further ahead and not Gary Vee level, and looking at how is he doing the content. So as someone myself who sits in that seat, I think there's double value in going and following Jay.
Yeah, I love his content. I also love how he like shares like when he's like breaking through and getting his wins. He's like, oh, this was really working, and here's my revenue, and now I'm crushing it. So yeah,
back to what we were
authentic.
talking about earlier, that humility, that authenticity, that sharing a half-baked idea, those sorts of things like actually help you on a social channel like LinkedIn more than you think it's going to hurt you.
Sweet. Next one. If you have, and we kind of covered this one in the show, but I'm going to ask it anyway. If you had 0 followers on LinkedIn, what do you do? How do you start?
Yeah. So I would start following people in the niche that you want to serve. I would start commenting, and then I would start sending connections, and then I would start turning those comments into my first, posts, and then get some people, even if you're, an individual, find some friends who are willing to support you. Make sure you're connected with them, and share your content, support their content, and spend some time on the platform just engaging, commenting, and you'll be surprised to see, like, I have a friend who literally had her first 3 posts on LinkedIn, got like 12,000 views, like 500 connections or something like that. Like when she posted her first post, it said like, congratulations for your first post after being a member of LinkedIn for 10 years or something like that. And so one of the things, like people who have been active on the platform for a long time, like myself, like I said, I'm not 100,000 followers on LinkedIn, but I've grown quite a bit. Like reach is a little tougher to come by for people who have been on for a while and who have decent followings than like in 2020. But I think that LinkedIn is kind of incentivizing the new creators. Like, oh, here's someone here. Let's give them a little taste of the reach. So if you're thinking like, oh, it's too late for me to get started on LinkedIn, it might actually be the perfect time.
Yeah, I see that. I think I did a post the other day, and it did like 8,000 or 9,000 impressions. And I was like, whoa, that wasn't even like, I wasn't even trying to make that like pop. So yeah, if you haven't created, start putting out content. Last question I got for you, Logan, is 2024, what are you doubling down on? What types of either content types or different sort of ideas? What are you going to be doing that's going to be different than what everyone else is doing? And, maybe something that we haven't like covered as much. So just, it can be really anything, but like, what are some different things you're looking at for 2024 when it comes to content?
Yeah. So we've talked on short form video. We've talked on starting with interviews. I think those are going to be big things, and those are like core to my strategy. The other thing is collaboration, and especially for anyone like in B2B thinking about this, like, I see this a ton on YouTube Shorts. You see reaction videos, and reaction videos have been a thing on YouTube for a long time, even before short form video. Well, think about that with B2B content. So one of the things I did last year was at teamwork.com, we put out this report called the State of Agency Operations Report. And we tapped some partners and some influencers to like chime in on the research and include them in the report. One of the things I did was use a tool called Video Ask, where I could basically send them a form and they get a video of me saying, hey, here's this stat. What do you think about that? And then they can either type out an answer, record audio, or record video to respond to my question. And guess what? I pull that into a tool like Descript, turn it into short form video, and send that back to them and be like, hey, you could share this. I've already optimized it for you. I've already cut out the ums and ahs and made you look great. And guess what the CTA on the end of that video is? That report that we're trying to promote. So that's a collaborative way that you can get more people involved in your content creation, even asynchronously, and as a way to distribute the content, kind of going back to the theme here of like, we've got our pillar piece of content. Instead of just thinking about how can we distribute it, think about who can you distribute it with. I think that's going to be a big thing for 2024. Not so much how, but who.
I love that. And as we wrap up here, Logan, why don't you shout out your socials and your podcast? Where can our audience connect with you?
Absolutely. So I host 2 podcasts that drop every other week. If you are in any sort of service-based business, like a marketing agency, I host a podcast for teamwork.com called Agency Life that comes out every other Thursday. So we're talking about dealing with clients, marketing your agency, how to stop client churn, those sorts of things. There's some overlap with the other podcast that I host, Nearbound Marketing. You can find either of these in Apple Podcasts. That one, we're talking more about exactly what we just finished on. How do you go to market? How do you market yourself, create content in a collaborative way, not just with yourself, not just with people within your marketing team? So on that side, we go a little further on the marketing side. Obviously, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty easy to find there. My last name's Lyles.
Sweet. Thanks so much for coming on Uploading, Logan.
Thank you, Logan.
Thanks for having me, guys. It was a blast.